Hello, you are watching Sexpertise, and I'm your host and favorite sexpert, the Erica Rivera. Welcome to this final episode of our three-part anatomy series, Inside Out. Tonight we're taking a deep dive into one of the most misunderstood yet fascinating topics in sexual health, and that's the sexual response cycle. This isn't just about what happens physically during arousal, it's about the interplay of the brain, the body, and emotions that make intimacy a truly full body experience. Understanding this cycle helps us normalize our experiences, reduce anxiety, and cultivate a healthier relationship with our pleasure. Most of us were never taught the real science of arousal. We may have been told that sexual desire is supposed to just happen, or that there's only one way our bodies should respond. But the truth is far more complex and individualized. By the end of this episode, you'll understand why your body reacts the way that it does and why desire can feel spontaneous or even delayed, and why communication is the secret ingredient, of course, to satisfying intimacy. Throughout tonight's discussion, I'll also be using visual aids like I have during the last two episodes, which includes our vulva pillow to demonstrate internal changes that happen during arousal. And these visuals help us connect the dots between anatomy and sensation, making something that often feels mysterious far more relatable. By demystifying pleasure, we not only empower ourselves, but also create healthier, more connected relationships. All right, so one of the biggest misconceptions in sexual health is confusing desire with arousal. Desire is the mental or emotional want for sexual connection, while arousal refers to the body's physical response, increased blood flow, lubrication, and heightened sensitivity. You can feel one without the other. For example, someone may want sex emotionally but struggle to get physically aroused, or they may become aroused by touch even if they weren't actively in the mood at first. We also need to distinguish between two types of desire: spontaneous and responsive. Spontaneous desire means you think about sex and immediately feel turned on, which is often celebrated in media, but it isn't the norm for everyone. Responsive desire happens after some form of stimulation, whether that is physical touch, emotional closeness, or erotic context, and is extremely common, especially in long-term relationships. Recognizing this can ease pressure and normalize diverse experiences of turn-on. Understanding the difference between desire and arousal matters because it helps couples navigate mismatched libidos or avoid taking rejection personally. If your partner isn't spontaneously aroused, it doesn't mean that they don't find you attractive. They may simply need time, context, or connection to respond. Framing this as normal instead of a problem can transform intimacy and open the door to deeper, more compassionate communication. In the 1960s, researchers William Masters and Virginia Johnson revolutionized sexual science by directly observing the human sexual response. Their research led to the four-stage model that we know today: excitement, plateau, orgasm, and resolution. Each stage corresponds to uh, distinct changes, everything from increased heart rate and blood pressure to muscle contractions and genital engorgement. The excitement phase begins with initial arousal, so blood flow to the genitals, increased lubrication, and heightened sensitivity. This can transition into the plateau phase, where arousal stabilizes at a high level, and tension. I can't talk today for some reason. Let's get through this. And tension builds towards climax. The orgasm phase involves rhythmic muscle contractions, release of endorphins, and peak pleasure sensations. Finally, resolution is when the body gradually returns to a resting state, though this recovery period can differ dramatically between individuals. Side note, I rather stumble over my words than not be able to breathe like the last two episodes in this series. Anywho, while groundbreaking, this model that we're talking about doesn't fully capture the complexity of emotional intimacy or psychological context. It assumes a linear path from desire to orgasm, which doesn't reflect everyone's lived experience. That's why in later models like basins, which we'll discuss next, it adds a nuance and it better represents diverse sexual responses, particularly among women and individuals with responsive desire. So, Canadian researcher Rosemary Basin introduced a different perspective in the late 1990s with her circular model of sexual response. Instead of viewing arousal as a straight line, Basin's model highlights that desire and arousal can feed into each other in a loop. So, emotional intimacy, trust, and psychological factors can spark or enhance arousal just as much as physical stimulation. This model is especially important for people who don't always experience spontaneous desire. In Basin's framework, sexual activity may begin for reasons other than initial desire, such as wanting closeness, seeking stress relief, or responding to a partner's advances. Over time, physical arousal can trigger desire, creating positive feedback loop that builds intimacy rather than pressuring it. By embracing this circular view, couples can stop worrying about low libido or feeling broken if their desire isn't instant. Instead, they can focus on building contexts that invite arousal, like emotional safety, reduce stress, and of course, playful curiosity. This reframing validates many people's experiences and encourages communication rather than shame. During arousal, remarkable things happen internally that we rarely talk about. One key change is vaginal tenting. So the upper 2/3 of the vaginal canal, so this part here is the vaginal canal, it elongates and it lifts to create space, while the cervix will tilt slightly upward. And this process, combined with clitoral and labial swelling, prepares the body for potential penetration and enhances sensation. Engorgement refers to the increased blood flow to erectile tissues throughout the vulva. So the vulva here, including the clitoris and the vestibular bulbs and labia. So you don't see the vestibular bulbs here, but you see them here. So these are the bulbs. They are inside. So here we have the clitoris, which is depicted by, and if I look down, it's just so I can see that the camera is getting this angle, but here's your clitoris. The vestibular bulbs lie behind the vulva. And of course, there's erectile tissue throughout your labia as well. These tissues swell just like the penis does during an erection, yet most sex education overlooks this parallel. I don't understand why, but understanding engorgement is crucial for pleasure because full arousal often takes longer than we think, around 20 to 40 minutes for maximum blood flow compared to just a few minutes for initial lubrication. So, the internal clitoral bulbs surround the vaginal opening. And so, with that increased blood flow, it enhances sensation around this entire network. So, being able to show you these structures, it helps normalize why external stimulation is key and why rushing foreplay can lead to discomfort or missed pleasure potential. When we think about arousal, we often focus only on what's happening in the genitals, but so much of the magic is actually happening in the brain. Dopamine, known as anticipation neurotransmitter, it spikes when we feel excited or turned on, building that sense of craving and motivation. Oxytocin, often called the bonding hormone, floods our system during physical touch and orgasm, creating feelings of closeness and trust. And serotonin, our mood stabilizer, helps sustain feelings of well-being after intimacy. On the flip side, cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone, can completely sabotage arousal. When we're anxious, distracted, or overwhelmed, our nervous system prioritizes survival over pleasure, pulling blood flow away from the genitals and making it harder to become aroused or to orgasm. This is why stress management isn't just self-care, it's a foundational part of sexual health. So the key takeaway here is that sexual arousal thrives on safety. Feeling emotionally secure, relaxed, and free from judgment allows the brain's pleasure chemicals to dominate. This is why communication, consent, and setting the right mood are not extra, they're essential. When the mind feels safe, the body can follow. So the clitoris is often referred to as the powerhouse of orgasm, and that's not an exaggeration. Despite myths about vaginal versus clitoral orgasms, research shows that nearly all orgasms involve clitoral stimulation, whether direct or indirect. Even sensations deep inside the vagina are often transmitted through internal branches of the clitoral network. External stimulation, like touching or licking the glans and hood, is the most straightforward way to activate these pleasure receptors. Internal stimulation, like the G-spot play or thrusting, can allow clitoral pathways through the internal bulbs. So the G-spot being just about an inch into the vaginal canal on the upper vaginal wall, and thrusting, it'll trigger the clitoral pathways because of the internal bulbs inside and the legs, the crura, that surround the vaginal canal. Both routes are valid and can even be combined for blended sensations. Here, you'll see that the legs of the clitoris wrap around the vaginal opening, and this can visually help bust that myth that vaginal orgasms are somehow separate or superior when it's all part of the same structure. Understanding this anatomy empowers people to explore without shame or unrealistic expectations. So few topics spark as much debate in sexual health as the G-spot. Some experts argue it doesn't exist as a distinct structure, while others see it as part of the urethral sponge, a cluster of tissue along the front wall of the vagina that swells during arousal. So here, it's going to be hard to demonstrate with this particular puppet, but you can see this gem here, which represents that G spot, and it folds right in. It is inside the vaginal canal. So this cluster of tissue along the front wall of the vagina, it swells during arousal. Now, what we do know is that many people report pleasurable sensations when that area is stimulated, even if the exact anatomy remains debated. The G spot is closely connected to the clitoral network. Stimulating it often feels more like deep pressure or fullness than the lighter, tingly sensation of external clitoral touch. For some, this can lead to strong orgasms or even female ejaculation, though experienced very widely, and all responses are valid. Framing the G spot as part of a larger pleasure system rather than a magical button can reduce pressure and increase curiosity. Instead of chasing a specific result, approach this area with exploration and communication. It's less about proving something exists and more about discovering what feels good for you. Multiple orgasms happen when a person experiences more than one orgasm in a short period without fully returning to baseline arousal in between. This is more common in people with vulvas rather than those with penises, largely because many vulva owners don't experience a refractory period, the recovery window during which further orgasm is temporarily impossible. For those with penises, the refractory period can last from minutes to hours, influenced by age, hormones, and just overall health. For those with vulvas, continued stimulation, especially clitoral or blended stimulation, can sometimes lead to successive orgasms, each varying in intensity. However, not everyone enjoys or desires this, and that's perfectly fine. Exploring multiple orgasms should always be pleasure focused rather than goal oriented. And I've always said this about orgasms in general. That should never be the goal. It should be a pleasure focused experience. Chasing a number can create pressure, which ironically makes orgasms harder to achieve. The key is relaxation, ongoing communication, and respecting an individual's limits. Pleasure is valid whether it's one peak or several. Many people assume that sexual difficulties are purely physical, but emotional and psychological factors often play a much bigger role. Stress, unresolved trauma, shame about sexuality, or negative body image can all block arousal, even when there's physical attraction or desire. These internal barriers deserve just as much attention as any physical technique. Performance anxiety is another common arousal blocker. Worrying about doing it right, satisfying a partner, or living up to unrealistic standards can trigger the body's stress response, and it'll shut down pleasure signals. This isn't just about men or erections. People of all genders can experience performance anxiety. The first step in addressing arousal blocks is recognizing them without judgment. And I know that sounds way harder to do, but that is what you need to work on, is recognizing them without judging yourself. From there, tools like therapy, mindful breathing, and just honest partner conversations can help create a safer, more supportive sexual environment. Healing is possible, and pleasure is honestly worth working towards. Communication, my favorite topic in every episode. Checking in during intimacy doesn't have to kill the mood. In fact, Subtle verbal or non-verbal cues can enhance arousal by ensuring everyone feels safe and seen. A simple, "Does this feel good?" or "Do you want more of this?" invites collaboration rather than assumption. Curiosity is your best friend here. Instead of fearing rejection, view feedback as an opportunity to deepen pleasure. Phrases like, "Show me what you like," or "Can we slow down?" foster trust and encourage experimentation. When both partners feel free to guide and respond, intimacy becomes richer and much more rewarding. Over time, these conversations build a foundation of safety and playfulness. The more you practice talking about sex, the less intimidating it becomes. And when safety and openness are present, arousal flows naturally because both mind and body are fully engaged. Sexual aids like vibrators, lubricants, and arousal gels aren't signs of inadequacy. Let me tell you how many times I've had people literally come to me and tell me that they have felt like these types of aids meant that the other partner wasn't good enough or they were being replaced, etc. I've heard it all, and it's so far from the truth. It does not signal that you or your partner are somehow inadequate. These are tools that enhance pleasure and reduce discomfort. Vibrators can add consistent stimulation, lube can reduce friction, and warming or cooling gels can heighten sensitivity. All of these can be integrated into partnered or solo play. It's all a win-win. Choosing the right lube matters. Water-based lubricants are versatile and safe with most toys, while silicone-based lubes last longer but can degrade certain silicone items. Oil-based lubes should be avoided with latex condoms. Knowing these basics helps you choose what supports your experience rather than disrupting it. When discussing toys or enhancements with a partner, frame it as an exploration rather than a replacement. You can tell that's probably one of my biggest pet peeves, is when someone refers to these aids as replacements. It is not. These tools expand the menu of pleasure rather than suggesting something is missing. This mindset reduces stigma and invites more creative intimacy. So, I'm going to go ahead and show you again this internal model. So blood flow during arousal enlarges the clitoral system, it enlarges the bulbs and increases sensitivity around the vaginal opening. So because the bulbs are going to become engorged, you also have increased sensitivity around the vaginal opening. And then the shaft and crura, they extend deep into the body, making penetration pleasurable for reasons beyond friction. So all of this is going to elongate and swell, and that's located behind. So, and that why it becomes that much more pleasurable for penetration. So yeah, it's not just about friction. So mapping these changes for you visually, hopefully, I feel will help you understand why foreplay is essential and not an option. It is not optional, it's essential. It takes time for full engorgement to occur, and rushing can lead to discomfort or reduced orgasm potential. So, seeing this anatomy, I feel, reinforces that pleasure is also psychological and or physiological and not just psychological. I think normalizing visual education, because I did have my reservations about doing a couple episodes with these models, but I feel that normalizing visual education breaks shame cycles. I think when people can see how their bodies work, they often feel less self conscious and more empowered to explore. This is why tools like this vulva pillow are revolutionary for sex education because they bridge the gap between abstract information and actual lived experience. And my slides are not working. Here we go. Pleasure is evolving. All right, so this is the part where I want to talk to you about our sexual responses. Our responses are not static, all right? So they evolve across our lifespan. And the reason why I feel like it's important to touch on this is because I know that my audience varies greatly in age and different life experiences. And I find that a lot of individuals that I come across with lately are women who are older and they worry. And I know I mentioned this in the last episode about like the clitoris not working anymore and things like that. Absolutely not true. So we evolve across our lifespan. Hormonal shifts during puberty, pregnancy, postpartum, and menopause, and it can all affect arousal, lubrication, and orgasm intensity. These changes are completely normal, but they often go unacknowledged in mainstream conversations, which is why I felt it was important to include that today. Adapting intimacy to life stages means embracing flexibility and curiosity. What worked at 20 may feel very different in your 40s or even your 60s, and that's totally fine. Exploring new techniques, positions, or aids can help keep pleasure alive rather than mourning what's changed. I think by normalizing these shifts, we free ourselves from unrealistic expectations and shame. Sexuality is a lifelong journey, not a single destination. The more we allow our bodies to continue to evolve, the more fulfilling intimacy can become at every single stage. So, tonight we explored arousal from the inside out, the brain chemistry, the anatomy, the myths, the realities of how desire unfolds. If there's one key takeaway, it's that pleasure is a whole body, whole mind process. When we honor both the physical and emotional aspects, intimacy becomes more connected and satisfying. As you reflect, please ask yourself what's one thing you learned tonight that surprised you, and what's one thing you're curious to explore, whether solo or with a partner. These questions aren't homework, they're just invitations to deepen your understanding of your own pleasure. Now, before I let you go, I do want to let you know that if you ever have any type of feedback or stories in reference to the topic at hand, my email is sexpertise@e360tvlive.com. I would love to hear from you. And I also have Patreon. So I appreciate you joining me in this 3-part anatomy series. Next month, we'll launch a brand new series chosen by our Patreon supporters. So if you want a voice in what comes next, join the Patreon community. All right. So I always send out an intimacy insiders tip sheet at the end of every episode where we dig deeper into the topic at hand. And also a lot of my Patreons have voting power as far as what topics comes next. As well as guests. I know I haven't interviewed anyone in a while, but we are working on it. And I do want your input on that as well. But until then, please stay curious, stay safe, and remember that pleasure is your birthright.